Righto. The numbers are flooding in now. It's time for us to kick off. I'd have to say good morning, good evening, good afternoon to everyone joining us here with today's joint webinar with Dallas Mount from Ranch Management Consultants. Dallas, thanks for joining us.
Welcome. Thrilled to be here.
My name's Cole Phelan, as many of you fortunately or unfortunately already know, because I tend to be running these webinars reasonably frequently. It's great to have you with us here. It's great to be running another joint session with Dallas, with Ranch Management Consultants in the States. It's great working with you guys and a whole bunch of your customers with MaiaGrazing. Today's webinar here is on cow depreciation. Now, I'm not the expert in this by any means. I hardly even know what it is all about, other than bits and pieces of reading that I've done, so I'm thoroughly looking forward to the session. What we'll do is we'll just kick off and get into it. We've got about 45 minutes today. I'll see if I can flick the next slide here. Today's talking points, really, it's essentially over to Dallas, really, but the only things I'll say up front is just a bit of housekeeping. Any questions that you may have pop up during the session, even questions you have now, feel free to just hit that little Q&A button down on the bottom. You'll find it on your screen there, and send through any questions. And if we don't get to any to answer those during the session, Dallas and I are going to run another catch up in the next day or so on video, and we'll send those answers out to your questions in another little short video form. I just found this picture of us just before the webinar, Dallas, of you and I there at Wheatland, Wyoming. It was great visiting you a few years ago there. I thought I'd throw this up, which was quite interesting for me. We put a bit of a straw poll out there to those who are registering for the session of really what were sort of topics of challenge for people, and you know, we can see there the results of what were representing some of the highest challenges. But then, and a lot of those were around the grazing management side of things, which is our real sweet spot here at MaiaGrazing. But when we sort of put the topics to, well, let's look at what we're going to talk about, what you guys are keen to talk about, it was about this whole cow depreciation business. And this is something which is I'm absolutely fascinated by. It wasn't something that I thought that we'd be talking about. So I'm very excited about understanding the context of this, a bit about it, what is it, how to manage it, etc. So without further ado, Dallas, I'll hand over to you. But this is just a couple of pictures of what our team have been doing over the last couple of days leading up to this webinar. We've been down in the Riverina area of New South Wales on a 3-day intense grazing clinic with RMC's sister business, RCS, here in Australia. And it was great to take a lot of our team down there, including those with grazing background, but also our software developers. So it was great to get out and actually see some grass as we're heading into early phase into summer. But I'll hand over to you now, Dallas. I'll let you share your screen, and I'll see you on the other side for Q&A. And if I start to butt in with a few questions, if some are coming through the door and I just think, you know, it's a good opportunity to answer them there and then, I'll do that. But over to you.
All right, sounds good. Thanks, Cole. Get my screen share up here. There we go. Looks like we're rolling. From the beginning, I enjoyed seeing the pictures of the Australian counterparts down there. Bring back fond memories of the time there. And I was telling them before we went live, jealous you guys are headed into grass season as we're headed out. So 6 months and before we have really meaningful growth seems like a ways away, but we'll get there. So. Thrilled to be with everybody today. Going to talk about cow depreciation. This is one of my favorite topics to discuss. We dive into it pretty heavy at the Ranching for Profit School, and I'm going to give you a snapshot of it today because it really is an enormous leverage point for people that are in a breeding herd business. And so if some of you are kind of scratching your head about, like Cole mentioned that he is, what is this cow depreciation stuff? And most people are like, well, I understand the idea of depreciation, but how does it apply to cows? And perhaps more importantly, what can I do about it? I think that's where we want to go today and spend some time talking through that. So with that, let's dive in. I think you got to give credit where credit's due. And Wally Olson is one of my mentors. And I think he said he was going to be on the call today. So I hope you're on here listening somewhere back there in the background, Wally. But Wally's really been a thought leader on the front of the cow depreciation side of things. And one of the best quotes that Wally always likes to remind us of is, you have to have appreciation before you have depreciation. And the quote I stole from Wally there is, appreciation comes before depreciation in the cow business. So, and I think what Wally's getting at there is look for those opportunities you have to add value to animals, and what can you do about it as you add that value, and taking advantage of that, and not just waiting around with those animals until they're worth far less. So thrilled to have Wally with us. And some of you guys that haven't been following Wally, if you go to Olson Ranch LLC, you'll find Wally and a lot of his writings and the things he's talking about. So let's dive in. Depreciation, definition of it. Accountant mumbo jumbo used to avoid taxes, right? That's what depreciation is. No, it's really not that. It's quite a bit more than that. Let's dive into just and calculate some basic depreciation. It might take you back to some of your high school accounting classes, and some of you might fall out of the chair. Oh boy, here we go, right? So let's think about, what is the formula for straight line depreciation, okay? So straight line depreciation, meaning we're going to figure out an average annual depreciation. Okay. So if we were going to figure out depreciation on a pickup, okay, let's think about that pickup. How would we calculate what's the average annual depreciation for owning this pickup? Yeah. So somebody's probably suggesting, well, we could take the purchase price minus the salvage value and then divide that by what? By the years of service. Okay. So there's your formula for straight line depreciation. Okay. So let's run an example of that. Purchase price. Okay. Every number I'm going to use is going to be wrong. We're looking for the principal. So let's say we bought a pickup for $60,000. Okay. And we're going to own it for 5 years. So we'll do the years of service for 5. So at the end of those 5 years, what do you think we could sell it to somebody else for? Okay. Let's just say $45,000. Okay. So it's 60,000 minus 45,000 divided by 5. Okay, that's going to be our formula for straight line depreciation on this pickup. So 15,000 divided by 5. I'm glad I picked those numbers because even I can do this math. Okay, $3,000 of annual depreciation. Okay, so essentially that pickup is going down in value by $3,000 every year that we own it. Okay, straight line depreciation. Now, if you step back and think about that, does the pickup really depreciate that way? Does it depreciate $3,000 this year, the next year, and the following year? Well, most of you are saying no, it doesn't do that, right? Everybody says, well, if the pickup's worth 65, when you drive it off the lot, it's probably lost at least 5,000, right? So just the act of driving it off the lot is going to make it lose some money, and then that next year it's probably still going to depreciate fairly heavily. Right. And then the year after that, it might slow down a little bit. The year after that, it's probably going to slow down a bit more. So that depreciation line on equipment, things like pickups, often looks more like this, right? It starts out steep and then it starts to flatten out. Okay. So where we're calculating straight line depreciation is we're just saying, well, let's just simplify it. Okay. And let's just draw a line like that. And so the $3,000 would represent, right, annual steps down that line. Okay. Well, but in the back of our mind, we know it really is depreciating more like this. Okay. Now I want to pause here and say, as we're talking depreciation today, I'm not talking tax accounting depreciation. Okay. This has nothing to do with the way your tax accountant has put your cows or your pickups or anything like that on your depreciation schedule for tax purposes. Okay. What they're doing for that is very different from what we're doing. What we're doing is we're looking for actual value. We're looking for that change in value. Okay. So think of it as economic depreciation, not tax accounting depreciation. Okay. All right. So I'm guessing most of you are with me here. Depreciation on that pickup, you can see it's about $3,000 a year if we calculate straight line depreciation. So let's move from talking about the pickup. Okay. So we'll call this the pickup. And now let's talk cows. Okay. So we're going to calculate straight line depreciation on some cows. And we're going to talk about your neighbor's cows because they're a heck of a lot easier to think about in terms of depreciating, right? Because your neighbors depreciate, ours don't. Okay. Purchase price. So let's put down the number for a young bred animal. Okay. Again, every number I'm going to use is going to be wrong. I'm just going to throw some out for the sake of conversation. So let's say we pay $1,500 for a young bred animal. And then we're going to subtract out the salvage value. Okay, what are we going to sell that animal for when we're done with it? Now, most of your neighbors are going to take those animals all the way out to cull. And if they're lucky enough to survive and make it to the cull pen, for this example, let's say we get $700 for that cull animal. Okay. Now, here's the interesting one: is years of service. Okay, how many years is that cow going to give us? So when we think about years of service, the term what we're going to think about here is calves in her life. Okay, calves in her lifetime. How many calves is she going to produce? How many calves is the average cow going to produce before she exits the herd as a salvage animal? Okay. When we ask groups of cattlemen this, the number ranges from 3 to 10. Okay. So let's actually calculate it because it's an interesting number that might surprise you, and walk through some numbers here to figure this out. If we start with 100 bred cows, year one, okay, they've all been confirmed pregnant. It's a nice group of cows. We got 100 of them pregnant. Now, if we look at industry averages for how many of those might die, how many of them might not wean a calf, going to lose that calf at calving time, or lose that calf before weaning time, how many of them might be culled for reasons other than infertility. So this is bad legs, bad bag, bad eye, bad disposition. How many of them might be culled as opens? And we total all those numbers up. Most of your neighbors are going to have about 20% of those animals that they're going to cull every year if they were selling the opens. Okay. Now, a lot of your neighbors, they take those opens and they run them another year, right? They give them another shot. Okay. We're going to assume we sell everything that doesn't wean a calf. Okay. So in that scenario, 20% of them. Okay. So we're going to apply this 20%. This is the replacement rate. Okay. And that's pretty industry standard of 20% replacement rate. Okay. And so we're going to apply this 20%, and let's run this out and see how many calves they wean. So at the end of the first year, how many are going to be left? Okay. Well, that math is pretty easy. 20% of 100 is 20. So when we subtract those out, we're left with 80. Okay. And we've weaned one calf. So I'll draw that over here, one in the circle. Okay. Now I'm going to take that 20% and I'm going to apply it to the 80. I'm going to run some math here. 80 times 0.2. Okay. That gives me 16. So now I'm going to take 16 animals and cull them. That leaves me 64. Okay. So I've had 2 calves now, and I'm down to 64 head. I'm going to take that 64 times 20% again, and that's 12.8. I'm going to round it to 13. Subtract it from the 64. That gives me 51. I've got 3 calves, and guess how many animals I'm down to? Right about half of what I started at. Okay. Now I realize the math that doesn't quite work perfectly if you keep walking this down, but if you do walk it down and then you cull everything, say 10 years or older, and then you go back and you average them all together, how many calves will the average cow produce before she leaves the herd at a 20% replacement rate? Okay. Industry average, if you're culling opens, is about 3.2. 3.2 calves per cow, okay, is industry average. Now, some of you might be saying, well, my cows are way more productive than that. And they might be, okay. Maybe you're getting 4, okay, but you're probably not getting 5 or 6 or what you thought, okay. And if you are, it might your cost structure might be way off the charts on that. Okay. It's not necessarily more profitable to have this number be really high. Okay. There's a lot of things involved in that, right? But it's important to remember productivity and profitability are not very strongly correlated. Okay. But 3.2 is the average per calves per cow. So let's apply that number in our example over here. Some of you are still scratching your head. You want to go back and run that again. Okay, watch the recording and do it on your own cows. See what your number comes to. Okay, 3.2. All right. So we've got the 1,500 minus the 700. Okay, that leaves us 800 divided by the 3.2. That's going to give us 250. Interesting, that worked out to be that even number. $250. Okay. Now, what is that number? That's straight line cow depreciation. Okay. Average depreciation per cow per year, straight line depreciation. Okay. Now, remember, we looked at the pickup and the pickup went like that. Okay. Here in a little bit, we're going to go look at how these cows depreciate, and we're going to realize they don't depreciate straight line. Okay. But for the average cow in this herd with these numbers I gave, every cow every year is costing you $250 in cow depreciation. And that's a big number. I hope it jumps up and slaps in the face. In fact, for many of you, that's the biggest cost. If you pull out all those different costs of running a cow, that's the biggest cost of running a cow that you incur all year is cow depreciation. Okay? Now, some of your neighbors, their feed cost is first and then cow depreciation is second, but it is absolutely one of the biggest costs of running a cow is the change in value from that animal as a young bred female to that salvage animal. Okay. Now, how do you pay for this, right? Because you don't actually write a check for $250 every year, do you? Okay, but what do most of your neighbors do? They have a set of heifer calves that they don't sell. So in today's market, they could probably take $700, $800 for those heifer calves. They don't take that $700 or $800. Instead, they say, no, I'm not going to sell her and I'm going to run her for a whole nother year. I'm going to put a whole nother year of cost into her. Okay. And then those that are successful, I'm going to put them into my cow herd. Okay. That's where you're paying that $250 is that trade of value from either if you're growing them your own, there's a cost of developing those heifers versus that cull animal. So what I want you to be aware of here is cow depreciation is a big cost. Okay? And you need to pay attention to it. And we're going to move now into those leverage points about what can you do about it. Okay. Cole, I'm going to pause right there. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, just one question, Dallas. I mean, and this is just for me, I'm the numpty in the room here. You know, if the salvage value, yeah, this is, you know, what you're going to be able to get for this cow, you know, 5, 6, 7 years down the track, right? When markets are hot, like they're here in Australia, and you can, you know, how does that sort of throw the apple cart out here? Or, you know, is that something where in a business, you know, if you've got access to these markets and markets are hot and you can still get a pretty high price for salvage cows at the end of their, you know, productive sort of cycle or towards the end there because people just want to squeeze one more calf out of them or something like that, you know, how do you view or this, you know, cow depreciation in that sort of scenario? I guess that's a bit cyclical too. It's not always like that, but.
So maybe here's the price of that bred cow. Okay. And we were here and now we're here in your markets, right? Ours are acting differently right now. And then here's the price of that cull cow. Okay. And what you're often going to find is they're going to trend similarly. Now they're not going to mirror each other quite like I drew it there. Right. But what you're interested in as you're figuring these things up is we're interested in the spread in today's market. Okay. The spread in today's market. It doesn't matter what you purchased her for. Let's say this is a 5-year-old cow. It doesn't matter what you purchased her for 5 years ago. Okay. That money's long gone. What you're going to look at is what would it cost me to replace her in today's market? And then what's she worth on the coal market? Okay. So as these things move up and down, they generally follow each other. Now, there will be times when they come closer and they get further away. As they get further away, that cow depreciation cost goes up. as that spread gets closer, that cow depreciation cost comes down.
Gotcha. Yeah, and I think a question that's just come in, and I'll let you move on in a second. You may have just gone to answer that, but from John, thanks for sending it in. If you're keeping replacements, is the annual depreciation the baseline for the cost of the replacement heifer?
I'd say it's what you could have sold that bred heifer to somebody else for. And so if we're keeping that $700 heifer calf, it might cost you another $600. Your cost into her is really irrelevant. What is important is what could you have sold a bred heifer to somebody else for? Because when we look at economic costs, that's what we're going to input her into the herd for. So if we could have sold her for $1,500, then we're going to bring her into our herd for $1,500, because that's where our value was created. So
excellent, thanks. And John, if that hasn't quite answered your question, get in touch and we'll make sure that we cover that off separately afterwards. But thank you, John, and I'll let you crack on, Dallas.
All right, sounds good. Good questions. All right, let's dive into this a little bit deeper. In the school, we teach folks how to calculate an economic value for their herd production, and let's do an example of that, kind of an abbreviated example together. So I'm going to see if I can find a better color than this green. That's kind of obnoxious. Here we go, a nice dark blue. Okay, 100 bred cows. Okay, now again, these are your neighbor's numbers. Yours are probably way better than this. But let's say 2 die. We have 17 that we're going to sell, and we can call those our dries, culls, and our opens. Okay, you might call them something different, but that's just the assimilation of all those. And let's say we're going to sell those for that $700 figure we were using. So 17 times the $700 is $11,900. That's going to be our total cull receipts for the year. And then we're going to wean 93 calves off of them. Okay. And let's say those calves are going to average in at $800, steers and heifers straight across, 93 calves at $800, 74,400. Okay. So if I total up my cash sales from this herd plus the 11,900, okay, I've got a total sales of 86,300. Okay. So what was my sales per cow? Okay. Total sales per cow is $863, right? 100 cows. We're going to do it on the cows that we started with. $863 was my total cash sales per cow. What was my total calf sales per cow? $744, right? Now, was that the value I created? Well, let's think about this. We started with 100 cows at the beginning of the year. By the end of the year, well, we just about followed that 20%. We're down to about 81 cows in the herd, aren't we? So with these cash sales, I actually sold off part of my factory in order to get there, didn't I? Okay, part of that cash sales are counting the sales of that factory. So I actually need to rebuild that wing of my factory in order to get back to where I started. Okay. So I had 17 that I sold. I had 2 die. Let's rebuild that wing. I need to buy 19 breds. Okay. Now I could buy them for myself. That's fine. You could raise them. But if I buy them for myself, I'm still going to pay market price for them. Okay. Now not actually write a check, but I'm going to value them at that. And let's use the $1,500 I was using before. Okay. So we take the 1,500 times the 19 breds that we need to get us back to where we started. And that is 28,500. And that is our purchases to get us back where we're going. Okay. Now, if we wanted to do a thorough job of this, we'd include cull bulls and purchase bulls, but we're trying to keep it simple here. So I'm going to take that 28,000 and I'm going to subtract that from the 86. Okay. So 86,300 minus the 28,500. Okay. So my value of production is 57,800. Okay. This is my value of production. Okay. That was the value I created that those 100 cows created for me. Okay. In the school, we call this term gross product. Okay, gross product, $57,800. Now, here's some interesting things to look at. What's my gross product per cow? Well, that's why I used 100 so I could do this. 578. Okay. Now think back here again. 93 calves weaned. My calf value per cow was 744. And that's where a lot of people stop their thinking, right? Is, well, how much did I get for those calves? And how many calves did I produce? So I've got $744 to spend. Well, not really, because we have to rebuild that factory. Okay. So the cost of rebuilding that factory is the difference right there. And that right there is another way to measure cow depreciation. Okay. So when you calculate gross product, the way we teach you to do it in the school, and I know RCS teaches a similar way, okay, the model takes care of cow depreciation. Okay, the model takes care of it. It's accounted for in there. But one of the things that we like to do is we like to pull it out and look at it separately because it's such a major cost. We want to slap ourselves in the face with it so we can pay attention to, boy, what is this cow depreciation number? Okay, what am I paying for it? If I just looked at my gross product of 578 and I said, boy, that's low, okay, it might not draw my attention that the cost of replacing that factory is really what's driving a lot of that. Okay, so just looking at this from a gross product standpoint, it's one more way to dive a little deeper into understanding cow depreciation. Okay, now I want to give you one more piece of the puzzle, and this has been popularized by Wally, so I want to give credit to where credit's due. Okay, this is the cow value curve. So let's think through. Remember how that pickup depreciated like this? Okay. Well, let's look at how this cow depreciates. Okay. And the way we do that is we think about what these animals are worth across every phase of their life. So we're going to start with what we call an H1. Okay. This is what most people would call a weaned heifer calf. Okay. And the number here is going to tell how many bull exposures this animal's had across its lifetime. Okay. So the H1s, these are the weaned heifer calves that we're going to run for a year, and we're hopefully going to turn them into bred heifers. Okay, when she's a bred heifer, we call her an H2. Okay, and once she gets bred with her second calf, we call her a C3. So now she's a cow. Okay, C3, and then she moves across her life, and we'll just keep recording them here. Try to make my spaces even. 7, C8, C9, and for most of us, we can stop about in there. So we'll take her out to a 10-year-old or actually even 11-year-old cow. Okay. Now let's think about her value per head. Now this is what the market price is going to be. It's an interesting thing to go to some dispersion sales and actually see what those animals sell for each age class of animal. Okay. So we're just going to take some guesses. And again, my guesses might be wrong for your market. Okay. So that H1, now I'm going to start my graph right here. And I'm going to say, if I came across there, those are selling for $750. Okay. So we've got some dots here on the graph, right, to get down to zero. Okay. Now I'm going to go up here to an H2, a bred heifer. And let's say those H2s are worth, clear up here on the curve, they're worth $1,400. Okay. And then I'm going to go to that C3. Now, this is an animal that's bred with her second calf. Okay, so she's got a calf at side. She's bred with her second calf. What would she be worth at the time of year after you've weaned that calf? Just for her, for most markets, she's going to go up some. Okay, and that's going to be variable depending on the year. But most time, people are going to pay more for that animal that's pregnant with her second calf. Okay, so I'm going to say they're $1,500. And now we're going to go out to C4, C5. They're probably going to come off those a little bit, but not very much. Okay, C4s and C5s. And now I'm going to start to get into those 6s and 7s and 8s. Okay, I would expect in most markets, we're probably going to see a bit of a drop. So let's show those start to go down here. And then when I get into those 9s and 10s, they're probably going to flatten out. Okay. So this is, as we connect the dots here, this is what we call the cow value curve. I didn't do a great job connecting those dots, but I think the point is made. So as you look into this, there's some interesting things. Okay, so what's going on? Why the steep? And this is Wally, right? You got to have appreciation before you have depreciation. Okay, so look over here. Boy, there's some opportunities here, aren't there? Now, why such the steep rise there? What am I not getting when I take that from a bred heifer, from a weaned heifer calf and turn it into a bred heifer? What do I not get? I don't get a calf coupon, do I? Okay, so there's no calf sold that year. So the only value I've created is all shown on this graph right here, right? So I've moved that animal from a $750 animal to a $1,400 animal, and I've had a full year's cost of running them to do that. Okay. Now, another thing to think about here is not every animal is going to go from here to here. Some of those animals are going to be open. Now, the open animals are still going up. Okay, I'm going to get a different color here so we can look at those opens. Okay, so those opens might come to right here, right? So we would have moved them from there to there. Okay. If you're doing this, if you have your cost to run those animals for a year below this line, that's a strong point to be, because you're making money on them when they're bred, and you're making money on them when they're open. And so that's a really powerful position to be. But we're not talking about that today. Now let's take them from this bred heifer and let's get them bred with their second calf. Okay. So we get a calf coupon. So that calf coupon comes over right here, and hopefully that's going to pay the cost of running that animal for a year plus some. And then I'm also going to show that those animals generally appreciate. They're going to grow in value. Yeah, that's pretty significant. That could be really, really used to our advantage. But what about those that don't get bred? Okay, what happens to them? Where does their value go? It goes right down to here, doesn't it? Yeah. So there's an enormous value loss for those animals that don't get bred with that second calf. Okay. So you really want to manage that. That's a key time for a lot of ranches, is managing that animal getting bred with its second calf to get a high success rate right up here. Okay. Because the fallout of those is really costly. Okay. Now, what else do you notice about this graph? What about this hump right here? Okay. What can we do to take advantage of that? So where does most cow depreciation occur? Okay. On the pickup, where did it occur? Here's the poorly drawn line I drew for the pickup. On the pickup, it occurred very highly on the front end, didn't it? Okay. On the cow depreciation curve, a lot of your cow depreciation occurs on those middle-aged cows until they run out to be old cows, right down here on this line. Okay. So not every cow on your ranch is depreciating at the same rate every year. A lot of that depreciation is sitting on the backs of those 6, 7, and 8-year-old cows. Okay. They're the ones that are really carrying it. Yeah. But look out here on the end of this line. Okay. The 9s and 10s, what do you see there? Okay. It's starting to flatten out. Okay. How could you use that to your advantage? So as I look at this curve, I don't think it tells you a prescription. I don't think it tells, well, everybody should be selling those cows at 5 and 6. That's not what it's telling me. Or everybody should be raising these animals back here that are young. That's not what it's telling me. It's also not telling me that everybody should be running these old cows. Okay. It's not what it's telling me. What it's saying is, where is your competitive advantage? Okay. Where is your competitive advantage? What can you do well? Let's write that out here. What is your competitive advantage? Okay. Does your competitive advantage lie out here? Can you take those cows that are maybe running in some rougher country and buy them right here and get another calf or two out of them and only have this little bit of depreciation that you absorbed through those? Okay. Or maybe your depreciation's back here on this end. Are you really good at getting those heifers bred? Do you have a strong market for them? Can you do that well and at scale? What about here? This one's probably even more tricky. What about getting those that have had their first calf rebred with their second? Yeah. Maybe you want to operate right out here on this cow herd. Okay. Why would be a cool place to operate here is that's a really simple system to run. Right? There's no heifers to calve out. There's none of those animals that really are going to take a lot of TLC. One person should be able to take care of a lot of animals, right? So if we can do this at scale and do it cheaply with low overheads, maybe that's where we need to be operating, is running that business here. Okay? But it does beg that question. Where is your competitive advantage? Here's a way of thinking about it is each age class of cow on your ranch has a different gross margin. Okay? If you enterprised every age class of animal on your ranch, enterprise the heifers, enterprise those 2-year-olds, enterprise the middle-aged cows, enterprise the old cows, which one has the better gross margin? I guarantee you that one age class of animal has a stronger gross margin than another age class of animal on your ranch. So what do you do with that? Well, if you want to figure it out, and then you say, boy, I'm making an extra $200 on every one of these young cows that I'm running versus these 5, 6, and 7s because that depreciation's killing me. Okay. Well, maybe then I should sell a larger piece of those and emphasize this part of my business, right? Do more of what's working well. Maybe you find that you're making your money right out here, okay? Taking those animals that are already devalued and getting another calf or 2 out of them. Okay? Maybe you want to ignore everything we just talked about because you're profitable enough and you don't need to worry about this stuff. If that's the case, great. But if you're looking for a stronger gross margin in your cow herd, there can be a lot of solutions in this stuff we're talking about. Okay. So I think I'm nearing the end of my time, but I want to wrap up with some key points here. What can you do about this cow depreciation? What are your leverage points? Okay. If you go back and you look at that original formula we started with, purchase price minus salvage value divided by year of service, right? There's 3 strategies inside of that formula. Let's input animals at a low cost. Okay. We could raise them cheaper or we could buy them cheaper. Okay. So how do we get animals that are going to be successful in our system inputted into the herd at a low cost? Okay. We could talk for hours about that alone. Okay. Number 2, everything that leaves the ranch is marketed to its greatest potential. So what could you do about that? What about those late bred cows that are leaving? Okay. Could you package those together and do something with those? What about those hard culls, right? Those animals that just need to leave. Is there some strategies we could do with those hard culls? Are there some market timing things, some seasonality things we could think about in everything that's leaving the ranch? If we're doing a direct marketing beef program, these animals offer great opportunity to put into some kind of direct marketing beef. So everything that leaves the ranch is marketed to its greatest potential. Next thing is increasing years of service. Okay, now that asterisk, that means caution, costs. Okay, so we want to be careful about chasing production, right? Production at the sake of all other things. If you wanted to get a 95% conception rate in your cows every year, could you feed your way into that? Probably. Would it be a profitable strategy to do that? Probably not. Okay. If you got 95% conception, could you increase the years of service from 3.2 up to 5? Probably. And you might go backwards doing it. Okay. So we really need to think about that. Now, are there some low cost ways to find animals that fit your environment? And maybe some low cost strategies in terms of supplementation where a little bit of input can have a big result? Yeah, those are the kind of things we're looking for. Okay. So ways to increase that years of service, but you got to be careful of the cost. And then the next thing is that cow value curve. So how can you exploit your competitive advantage on the cow value curve? Okay. What are things that you do well, and how could you rearrange your system to do more of that and to hit that target? So there you go. There's cow depreciation in a nutshell. We talked about a lot of things there and covered a lot of ground. And hopefully I've got your wheels spinning on some things to do. So I'll pause there and bring Colin for some questions.
Yeah, look, Dallas, that was great. I mean, it's essentially taken me from a completely ignorant position to probably a position of ignorance and confusion. But I think you're painting a picture there for me. I can see how this is very market specific, and I just did the quick maths on those who are on the call, and it's roughly we've got people from Europe and New Zealand and South Africa and South America and all of that sort of thing, but roughly we're sort of looking at about 65% attendees on the call from the States, where you're looking at your salvage value of your cattle are so much lower than, say, here in Australia. I like, rather than throw it up to a slide that just says questions and answers, throw in your questions. I think I know that we've got a whole bunch of people on the call that have got a whole lot of questions and they haven't been firing them at us. So I'm going to go out and harvest some questions from 5 or 6 people on the call, and feel free to send any through, and we'll run another session on this. But what you got there, so exploit your competitive advantage on the cow value curve. You just drew the cow value curve, right? How difficult is it from scratch for someone to model that up on their property? And perhaps, for yourself and Wally and whatever, you're doing this for years, it's an intuitive thing. It's just another consequence of you just doing your thing, right? But for people like, just say me, that just imagine I had an operation and I wanted to be able to look at that. So how I could sort of segment that out for, how rough is that to get even as a bit of a mind map model for people? Because this is all about framing, those sort of decisions or sort of questions that you can ask yourself about input animals at low cost, leaving and marketing the greatest potential, increasing years of service, exploiting the cow value curve. That's all very powerful stuff that whether you had this cow value curve or not, you should be asking yourself these questions. But it's a great reference point. But how does someone sort of go from 0 to there in a reasonably representative way?
Yeah. So the way we build this when we work with people individually is we look at a market that would represent what they have on hand. And if you can find some information where there was a dispersion sale or even just looking through sale on receipts, you can come to a pretty good idea of what each of those age classes of animals on your herd is worth, right? And what you might be able to do with them. And as you draw this up and then think about, how could I take advantage of this if I wanted to, right? It's going to lead to some really interesting discussions. Let me give you an example of the power of this. There is an EL member business that has really looked at this, and they've said, you know what, we raise animals in a hard environment, and we're good at raising these young animals and getting them bred and getting them rebred. And we want to package these animals that are bred with their second or third calf and put these together and put these forward in a market of people that are looking for hardy animals, right? And so they were able to take that and actually move that dot from like market prices here, and we're able to move that dot like clear up to here by doing some good marketing on these and putting together some packages. And it added about $250 to $300 of gross margin for every animal on the ranch by doing that when they looked across the whole herd. So if you can talk about an additional $300, and if the average person's, let's say they're running 400 head of cattle, that's $120,000 difference to that ranch for making those kind of moves. So I mean, we're talking about some things that can be the difference between somebody being able to come back and be a part of the ranch or not. And these are the kind of high value things we're looking for, right? Is where can there be opportunities to really create value with that? Now, the old way of thinking, is, well, my gosh, she's not paid for herself until she's 3 or 4 years old, right? And that kind of thinking, it's garbage. I don't understand, where that train of thought comes into. But that cow needs to pay for herself every day that she's standing on the ranch, right? Now, these animals down here, they're not creating cash flow unless you sell them, but they're paying for themselves because they're appreciating in value, right? So we need to think about things differently and look for these opportunities to really create that. So
yeah, and I guess this model, just even say back home here, and the stock flows or whatever can create a sort of a similar feel, and it can be market specific, but it's creating that framework for you to essentially ask those four questions of your business, regardless of whether you've got that model perfect or even conceptual, but you're at least understanding that there's this stuff going on in the background. Question that's come through, Steve, thanks for sending it in. What else should we think about in terms of herd structure? Increasing replacements required if we sell younger cows and average weaning weights from a younger herd. Now, I know Steve, he's here in Australia.
Good. Yeah, those are good questions, Steve. And certainly this is going to be a systems question as we come and look at these things, right? It's going to have ripple effects throughout the business. A lot of the ranches that we work with that have looked to ways to leverage this. So let me give you that example I just talked about. So they're going to need to essentially keep every heifer calf, expose them to breeding, and then they might even consider buying their neighbors' heifer calves that fit their program. Right, so they have more heifer calves to roll into the program. In our markets, weaning weight is really not an important issue related to calf value. Oftentimes, you'll see lighter weaned calves that are worth as much as their 100-pound heavier counterparts. So if depending on what's a profit driver in your business, for U.S. ranches, weaning weight is pretty far down the list when you look at profit drivers. It might be different in your markets.
Great. Thanks so much. And we can see on the screen here, you've got a bit of a plug for some upcoming schools. There's going to be some information that come through in everyone's inbox, including the recording of the webinar, or send it to friends, family, anyone else you think that may be interested in the recording. But there'll also be some information on the upcoming courses, etc., that are going. What I might do is I'll just put our contact details up there alongside yours. So if you could just hit the button. Here we go, and I'll throw this back up and go on to the next slide here. And it's essentially just our contact details. Dallas had them up here earlier. I thought I'd put ours up there as well. Dallas, we will run another session because I've got a few specific questions which for the Australian market as well as the US market, and that's maybe how we sort of attack this little next session. And I'll also go out to a few of those people on the call list to get their thoughts, and because I know there's a whole lot of stuff that's being ruminated around there, and I can sense there's a whole lot of cogs turning. But if you'd like to get in touch with us in terms of learning a bit more about MaiaGrazing and how that could be applied to supporting the management of your natural resource base and balancing the animals' demand and the supply and grazing plans and forecasting and so forth, get in touch. Likewise, get in touch with Dallas, but all the details are there. And thanks for joining us. And I'd say next time round we may probably run a session focus on some of those other areas which were of interest in the straw poll that we did about topics that are top of mind for our mutual customer base and the broader community. Any parting words of wisdom, Dallas?
Just a word of thanks to MaiaGrazing for helping put this on. You guys are a great partner in education, and we really appreciate your drive to help get this information out. So appreciate everybody being on tonight. Hopefully we added value, gave you something to think about. So
absolutely, and I just look forward to our next session. You having an enormous beard as the snow hits the ground. That's right. That's one of my goals.
All right, I'll start working on that. Here the joke is the playoff beard, right? So for the hockey, so I'll try to grow a nice playoff beard for you, Cole.
Yeah, no pressure.
All right.
Thanks everyone, and happy grazing.